We are in chapter 12, part 2, and this one is going to be a little shorter, especially after yesterday's was a little long, but we're in verse 15, and let's go ahead and dig in. Aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. Many followed him, and he healed all their sick, warning them not to tell who he was. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love and whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Till he leads justice to victory. In his name, the nations will put their hope. Okay, so just a few notes on this particular section. One of the things that we've talked about with the persecution is to move on. Is once persecution begins, then you move on. You keep on spreading the gospel into other areas that are more receptive to it. So he's aware of the fact that they're trying to kill him, and he goes ahead and moves on. He goes from that place and keeps moving. Also, Jesus in verse 16 warns them not to tell who he was. So they knew who he was. The ones that he healed, they knew who he was. And that's why he's telling them. But it wasn't his time yet. And I was just talking about this with my Wednesday night class in discussing. Jesus says many times to not tell yet, that it wasn't the right time. But the people were still telling. So I've had this wondering, and it may not be true. I don't know. Of course, God knows everything, but we are very involved too. God involves us in answered prayers, in the movement of earth, and bringing the kingdom of God down to earth. He requires our involvement. So if these people he tells not to tell, and they tell, did it move the time clock up? Would it have been that Jesus was here for longer than 3 years? Could it have been that he was actually planning on staying for, who knows, 7 years? But the people's response by not obeying his words and going ahead and telling before his time, before he said it was time, could it be that he actually moved his time frame up? Now, is God sovereign? Can he use that time frame? Yeah, completely. He was here for 3 years before, or in ministry for 3 years before he was taken up. But again, only until we get to heaven do we know if that's what took place. But it is something I've pondered on, was it because of the people telling too soon that Jesus only spent 3 years in ministry instead of, say, 7? Because of all the plotting that began to take place, and the religious leaders beginning to accuse, because they were getting more and more, what was the word I'm looking for? They're getting more not weapons. I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, they're ammunition. That's the word. They're getting more ammunition to be able to go against Jesus. And later on, we see that he's okay with them talking. But for a good bit, he keeps telling the people, it's not my time. It's not my time. So, I don't know. Maybe they actually moved Jesus' timeline up. Maybe not. But in all of it, God still uses it. And do we do that sometimes? Do we maybe move a timeline up or move things around that maybe God intended in a different way? Maybe there was something that he was wanting to extend, a good time for us to have an extension of his presence in a particular area in our life, but we rushed things and we didn't exactly listen to him, and so we kind of not force his hand, but speed things up a little bit in our own ways of trying to, just like Abraham and Sarah. They did more than just speeding up time. They completely made a shortcut, as we've talked about before. But the concept is sometimes we get impatient and we move things up. And so maybe that happened for Jesus. Who knows? But it's an interesting discussion thought. And we will pick this up tomorrow with verse 22 now.